Back in 1987, in the pages of X Factor, mention was made of the 12, a group of immensely powerful mutants destined to change the course of the future. It was speculated who may be included: Professor Xavier, Wolverine, because of course, and even Franklin Richards. But their specific identities and what they do remained a mystery for more than a decade.
Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. Apocalypse, another potential member of the mythical group, is one of the most formidable foes the X-Men have ever faced. He's lived thousands of years, corrupted many lives to serve him, all in the name of his twisted version of Darwinism. Today, we begin taking issue with Apocalypse, the 12, a cross-title story which sees another mad scheme unfurl and reveals just who is among their number. Let's kick this off with Uncanny X-Men number 376 and see if this story makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads.
The issue is plotted by Alan Davis, scripted by Terry Cavanaugh, with art by Roger Cruz, the team of Bat, Owens, and Palmiotti, and Liquid on colors. The cover is kinda plain. It's just various disembodied heads of differing sizes against a white backdrop.
Those are chock full of heady goodness.
Wow, the Futurama Head Museum must be in the middle of an organizational nightmare. No wonder they don't allow wild parties.
It's pretty simplistic, but the weird thing about it is that the subtitle character and Sabanur himself is kinda nestled behind Wolverine and Magneto. You'd think he'd be featured more prominently since, his name is right there above him, all dramatic-like.
But hey, I get it. Even when the story is clearly about someone else, Wolverine takes precedence. He must have gotten that kind of exposure mandated into his contract. You'll get pretty far in negotiations when you have 6 claws and a hair-trigger temper.
We begin in the Danger Room, where Cyclops is blasting some hovering orbs. Eat your heart out, Luke Skywalker. While classic and then modern iterations of the X-Men appear behind him, all ethereal-like. Narration gives a summation of his experience as one of Xavier's first students, learning to tame his destructive powers. He came here as a boy.
He also learned to fight in a distinct and vibrant costume while facing terrorists and super-powered madmen as a boy. Are we sure Batman isn't really the headmaster here?
A 2-page spread shows more reminiscing as he trains, getting married to Jean Grey, taking a break from the team, eventually returning, dealing with the Skrulls, and then an imposter Wolverine. All this making him question his place among the X-Men. But what I question is seeing Wolverine with a stogie as Storm talks about the imposter. This issue takes place right after they found out Pocky's new Horseman of Death was Logan, as seen in my first Death of Wolverine review from Season 3, so I'm not sure why they have him here in this scene, other than a mistake from miscommunication, I'd wager. Jean walks in, aware of her husband's troubles, and says there'll never be a perfect or convenient time to be away from world saving, but they should still consider it. There'll always be some threat, but they'd recently evaluated the team and found them to be in top form. Psyche agrees, though it's all easier said than done, and the two leave the training grounds, observed by a shadowed figure.
Scott was actually training with another X-Man and totally forgot that he blasted them into a wall. That is going to be one awkward staff meeting.
We go to Egypt, where a priestly-dressed figure stands before an atypically large sarcophagus, declaring to his followers that their lord and master spent years fighting for their cause alone against godless barbarians, and was cast into space, as depicted here in this flashback fight with Thor. God of Thunder. Kind of makes that godless barbarian remark downright peculiar. However, their master, Ahmet Abdal, the Living Monolith, was eventually found by the Skrulls, who apparently revered his power, returned him to Earth so he could be reborn and fulfill his destiny for the new and last millennium.
Buying us all movie tickets with his senior citizens discount!
Back at the Xavier School, Gambit catches up with Rogue, thinking that after their psychic loyalty test in Uncanny 375, she's avoiding him.
I don't think that's fair. It's Gambit. There are plenty of reasons to avoid him.
Rogue figures whatever kind of relationship they attempt isn't going to pan out, so it may be best just to end things for good. As Gambit protests, Kitty Pryde and Colossus remind them they've got a briefing to get to, and they make their way. a sullen LeBeau hanging back a bit, observed by a pointy-eared Shadow.
Oh, the elves, the elves.
By the way, if you don't already know who these X-Men are, these accentuated names at the top aren't going to help you, since most aren't anywhere near their corresponding character. Professor Charles Xavier, a man whose dream of peace seems to be less likely every day.
The studio couldn't afford another X-Man.
Anyway, Chuck's gathered them all together to discuss the recently discovered diaries of the late Irene Adler, aka Destiny, the blind mutant who could see the future. Since some of the entries detail events that they've recently experienced, they seem to be the real deal.
Just like the gypsy woman said!
Oh, for...
One question, Professor? No, she did not include lottery numbers. Dang it.
At the same time, he coordinates Nightcrawler and Jubilee to apprehend a Skrull hiding in the vents, which I'm kinda surprised because in the last page, Jubes looked like she was kinda spacing out. The intruder suddenly grows in size and knocks out a wall, which really shouldn't be a thing. Sure, Skrulls are shapeshifters by nature, but their mass remains relatively constant because of laws of physics and everything.
In this house, we obey the laws of thermodynamics!
The dazed alien begins stumbling around, speaking in his native tongue as he shrinks to avoid capture by Rogue, and knocks out another wall with an oversized fist. That's where Colossus draws the line, since on the other side of that wall is Moira McTaggart looking over his brother Mikhail. He's ready to clobber the intruder until Shadowcat intervenes. Thanks to a mission to the Skrull homeworld that involved time travel, Kitty can speak their language and says the newcomer is Fizz, a Skrull mutant still trying to get the hang of his size changing. He didn't know how to speak any Earth languages, so he kinda skulked around, unsure of how to show them he wasn't hostile so as to deliver a message to the Xavier.
This is why the team keeps telling Charles to adapt to email, but no! He'd rather spend money on easily avoidable repairs to expensive high-tech equipment.
While the others listen to what Fizz has to say, by proxy, Mikhail is conveniently coming out of his coma. He's free of the entity that previously possessed him, and while that means he's lost the ability to travel to its dimension, he still retains his mutant powers of energy and matter manipulation. He's basically healthy, but still needs uninterrupted rest. Wow, halfway through the issue and this feels like a super happy sitcom ending. At least if you ignore how Moira looks either exhausted or distraught, and Mikhail saying he had a nightmare about pyramids and the return of a dark god.
Clearly he's talking about Bill Cipher, which confirms a third season of Gravity Falls, including an X-Men crossover. Hey, Disney owns those mutants now. Don't tell me it can't happen.
The team confirms that Fizz is alone and has no psionic abilities. And I gotta say, it's really weird how most of their eyes are left blank by the artists. It's not something you normally see for maskless characters other than Storm and Nightcrawler. Kitty translates that he was one of many like him in an underground base the X-Men recently discovered. Upon its destruction, Fizz went subatomic and hitched a ride on Nightcrawler, so was able to bypass Mansion security. He knows about Xavier's attempt to save the Skrulls' home planet from Galactus and wishes to join the team. With the help of a Shi'ar translator, Fizz continues himself. With his homeworld gone, his people are scattered. Considered outlaws by most, they were desperate for allies and found one rumored to be a kind of death god. This ally apparently has plans for Earth's mutants, and since Skrulls can't mimic their powers without technology, which would risk detection, genetic deviants like Fizz that are typically terminated at birth, yikes, suddenly had value. Some allowed to live and be marked with gold-colored lobes on their brows to indicate their impurity.
Well, aren't the Skrulls just a cheery people? However, like so many other themes in the X titles, there are elements in Fizz's tale that sadly have been true in human history. It's these kinds of allegories that can make storytelling with the X-Men titles in particular so impactful.
The aspiring X-Skrull says he doesn't know for sure what the threat to Earth is, only that human factions are being played against each other, and there are some mutants that cannot be harmed, either by decree of the Ally or the Skrull's higher echelon to use the 12 against their benefactor. Polaris is sick of hearing this, since she's mostly concerned about why the Skrulls took the costume of Havoc, her dead but remember this is comics dead boyfriend, and storms off. Cyclops goes after her, just as concerned since, Havoc's his brother, and not convinced he's dead given the lack of a body, though insists the costume is just a thing, not something to be too upset about. Lorna elaborates, however, that the orb on the cowl had recently been glowing hot before its theft, the same as when Alex Summers would use it, leaving the question of why Little Green Med would want the suit at all.
Obvious answer? They're going to a comic book convention and want a really convincing costume as a more obscure X-Man. I know they're shapeshifters. I didn't say their plan made any sense.
We return to Egypt, where the monolith has emerged from his slumber, infused by solar energies to a godlike state, or so he thinks, and his followers bow before him. Well, except for this one guy who claims to own the guy that just woke up on the megalomaniacal side of the bed this morning. It was he who found the directionless Ahmet Abdul and infused him with Havoc's DNA. Or I guess as this flashback shows, told Mr. Sinister to do it, resulting in an unexpected splitting of powers between them. Either that, or this is their version of Project Quantum Leap. Anyway, with Alex Summers gone, and Ahmet wearing his headdress, he has full access to their power, and declares himself the true ruler of the planet as he starts blasting the place, being insulted at the idea of being someone's pawn. The unassuming man, Apocalypse in a human disguise, displays his dominance by stopping Monolith mid-rampage with a scepter.
Wow, when they said universal remote, they were not kidding.
While Fizz is examined by Doctors McTaggart and McCoy, the team returns to the matter of Destiny's journals. Rogue, who was raised by the woman, never knew about them, noting that Irene tended to keep her visions to herself unless danger was imminent, and the more long-term they were, the less reliable they'd be. Xavier reads from the diary, specifically the List of 12, which includes the Prof himself, a bunch of X-Men, Colossus's brother, and the Living Monolith. A conclusion is jumped to that the list of people are going to save the world, even though nothing anyone said or was gleaned from the journals indicated that. But most of those listed are good guys, so I guess it's an understandable assumption. They'll try to locate the others on the list using Cerebro, and maybe, somehow, track the elusive and absent Wolverine. But in the meantime, trouble may come knocking on their door, so they'd best train. Scott and Jean have a private word with Xavier. Summers particularly upset about being pulled into the life like this again. Chuck understands, but situation being what it is, he needs him to pull things together as only Cyclops can. In the interest of full disclosure, the Prof reveals the final name on the list he didn't mention when Angel interrupted him earlier. Someone he needs to contact personally whether he likes it or not. Magneto.
You psychically lobotomize a guy and somehow things get awkward. Go figure. This was a good starting point for the story, even if the dialogue got a bit clunky, specifically with characters describing things as they were happening, with Fizz's size changing in particular. I was largely fine with the art, though blank eyes and very squinty faces were in odd abundance. Let's carry on with Cable number 75.
As indicated just below the Marvel logo, this is a giant-sized anniversary issue, so more pages than normal. Written by Joe Pruitt and Rob Liefeld, with art by Larry Stucker and Optic Studios, the cover sees the title character crouch jumping against a gradient background, his suit damaged, and a staff with a large feather in his hand.
I don't care if this makes me unpopular, but French maids just aren't as good looking as they used to be.
Or maybe he's cleaning up after a fight with a bunch of people that said Rob Liefeld can't draw feet. Just look! Feet! And Rob's logo!
No, this doesn't add up at all. We need a team of expert detectives to solve this mystery. Get Batman! Get Sherlock Holmes! Get Adrian Monk!
We open to credits in a brief history of Nathan Summers' life in the future, destroyed and reigned over by Apocalypse, and his quest through time to curb the immortal mutants' plans. With the new millennium and time to end Sabanor's threat at hand, the narration basically spoils what we find in the following couple of pages, but it probably happened in Cable 74 anyway. Cable is gone, leaving James Proudstar, Domino, and Cannonball to sulk in failure. Sam Guthrie feels that Deathbird and Caliban, if they were working for Big Bad A, probably took their leader to Egypt. That's where Apocalypse was born thousands of years ago, and that's where he'll make his last stand.
Hey, so what if Apocalypse still lives in his parents' house? Times are tough, money is tight, and have you priced a decent apartment in Cairo lately?
That's when we go to Apocalypse's lair, where Nate is being suspended on an X-shaped slab, narration insisting he's failed as he looks down at his hated foe, warning the High Lord to just kill him now, if he has any common sense. And he apparently thinks taking out Apocalypse is as easy as a neck snap. Someone's been watching too much Man of Steel. But the tyrant isn't concerned, feeling the once strong Nate has been made weak by notions of love.
The power of love is nonsense! Huey Lewis and the News lied to you!
Pocky gives an abridged version of the miniseries Further Adventure of Cyclops and Phoenix, at least the parts where he lured Nathaniel Essex to work for him and become Mr. Sinister. He rebelled not long after and eventually struck out on his own, while En Saba hibernated to gather enough energy to see his long-laid plans bear fruit. But a strange energy anomaly disturbed his evil nap, the distinct biosignature of Cable arriving in the past, and then the same biosignature again when Nate was born to Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, Jean Grey's clone. Naturally, since his whole deal is the strong survive, the weak die, Apocalypse infected the baby version with a techno-organic virus, either making the kid worthy to be his soldier or eliminating a potential enemy. When the kid vanished, but Cable didn't, time travel became the obvious conclusion, that he'd been sent to a future where Newer's eugenics-heavy vision was fulfilled. When Cable says he hasn't won yet, Apocalypse punches him, I guess? Given the impact effect, he either just winged him or is hitting the slab. And considering the height difference a couple pages back, I don't know if Cable was lowered or his captor increased his size. As they continue to compare who has the shiniest teeth, Big A is suddenly holding some kind of spear, saying the X-Men will soon join him, and threatens to kill all he loves. And I will save your precious waitress for last.
No! She's the only one at Applebee's that never screws up my order! You monster!
The villain poses with the spear, showing he does indeed lift bro, and pontificates on how the law of the jungle is observed on the battlefield, the slums, or even corporate offices, then tosses away the scimitar, claiming that a true warrior wouldn't use such a crutch. I guess that's what Cable was holding on the cover. I didn't really notice because the coloring was different. Seriously, who would have thought that was his weapon and not some kind of feather duster? Not to mention it keeps changing color from gold to silver throughout the story. Anyway, Nate wonders why he isn't dead yet, why a true warrior would keep his captive enemy alive, and Pocky leaves, telling him to await the test. The old Ascani's son is okay with being underestimated, since his enemy clearly didn't catch on that his scimitar is a means of focusing his telekinetic abilities, even without physical contact. The new Horseman of Death, Wolverine, watches all this, and senses there's more to the staff than it seems, immediately figuring there's a psychic connection. Does feel a little convenient, but these guys have known each other for a while. Cable tries to reason with him, even recalling how he forgave Logan for killing his son, who had been turned evil, but to no avail.
This is me now!
Heard that before.
The briefly gray-haired Wolvie says that he's fine with who he is, and doesn't miss the scorn and hatred that came with being an X-Man. Nate creates a psionic burst that knocks the mind-warped Canadian back. He retrieves his weapon, and even though their previous spats have ended in draw after draw, he intends to kill his former tenuous ally, rather than see him corrupted by Apocalypse any further. I owe you that much.
I'd settle for the $26.45 for the concession snacks I bought you when we went to see Les Miserables.
Even as the inevitable fight begins, Cable tries talking sense into the old knucklehead, but he retorts that he's just been enhanced into what he was all along. A killer! Death!
I am the angel of death. The time of purification is at hand.
Oath!
Why did Cable just blurt that out? Oath to what? The Hippocratic Oath? Because I'm pretty sure being the Horseman of Death doesn't mesh with that too well.
It's a back and forth of both punches and ideologies. Wolvie saying Nate's been corrupted to fight against his own kind, taking their rightful evolutionary place. Nate saying that Apocalypse's rhetoric masks his own deficiencies in fighting his own demons. That while everyone can do evil, it's our choices that define us. At its heart, it's not a bad discussion. It's just kind of odd that it's between these two characters as they're trying to kill each other. Wolvie ends up going feral, thus sacrificing his defenses and getting himself impaled on the scimitar. Cable unintentionally sends him down a pit of unknown depth, kinda like Zod in Superman 2. Not what Cable wanted, but hey, fight to the death. And it's not like Logan has healing powers or anything, right? That's when Apocalypse reappears on a splash page, with a snake-like lower half for some reason. He says Nate shouldn't mourn a fallen enemy, that the inner workings of the world involve death and rebirth, and, well, it kinda goes on like that. Splash after splash of physical combat and pontificating, Pocky boasting how he started as a slave and outlived his oppressors. Ooh, hey, he got his legs back in time, dressed with this vertical 2-page spread of the two posing the same way. Not sure how they'd hit each other like that. Or maybe they're attack belching in each other's faces.
I can understand if they want this confrontation to feel big, but the continuous splash pages look more like different versions of the same concept for a poster. They're fine aesthetically for the most part, but kind of interrupt the sequence.
Anyway, Nate somehow senses his enemy weakening and makes for a decisive strike, but it's not enough and he's knocked down. He could continue fighting, maybe even win, but that's when Wolvie reappears, threatening his buddy, the mutant tracker Caliban, and so Cable yields. Though I can't tell how he's threatening Caliban's life, we just see his clenched hands near his neck while it looks like Logan was a cutout sloppily placed on the page, or is growing out of the gray dude's shoulder. Anywho, Nate feels all life has value and someone, perhaps even Caliban, will stop Apocalypse somehow. The comic ends with the immortal boasting about the volatility within human nature, and the narration of failure from the beginning being repeated, with the addition of Cable praying that his enemy is wrong.
And that takes care of this episode. Quick history lesson on Cable, which does the trick fine enough if you're not familiar with him.
Though as for the art, facial expressions are mostly limited to teeth-gnashing scowls, empty stares, or evil smiles that look kind of awkward. Then there are lines that I think are supposed to be the wrinkling of the skin from facial expressions, but if so, they don't really work very well that way. The character designs don't really bother me as much as how in sequence they can sometimes feel clunky. And then there's this oddity with Wolvie and Caliban. I mean, yeah, he's got claws in his arms, so maybe that's what he's supposedly threatening him with. I think the anniversary issue gimmick may have been an excuse to pad the issue with several splash pages. Although, if you weren't overly familiar with Cable, this is a fine enough way to show his history and tie it into the overarching story, especially since after the story there are several pages of files on Cable's life. I can understand if their use of splash pages was intended to display some kind of enormity in the conflict between these two, but it felt more like filler, especially this page where the combatants are so small compared to all the flowing energy that takes up the rest of the space. More or less it was them hitting each other over and over again, which you'd think would be ineffective against Apocalypse, and had an awkward flow, not as good as the Death Marine fight. The arguments against Apocalypse's vision weren't bad, but it didn't feel like it had the oomph it could or should have. Like they were very basic talking points with no special insights.
Next week, the mystery continues to unfold as Charles Xavier looks up an old friend. Hope he remembers his plastic chess set. I'm the Angry Spork, and man have I got issues.